Okay, so we're here. This is Turn Bark time. I'm the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we're in this for a long time. So we are two history teachers, middle school teachers that wanted to basically give out kind of our take on historical events while we are currently occupied with the coronavirus.
So the first topic we decided that we would talk about is one that we've argued about playfully for a number of years, and that's who is the first president of the United States.
So this story goes back to kind of a trick question that my brother taught me a long time ago. I think he came home when he was in 8th grade and I was in 6th grade. And he looks me in the eye and goes, "Zach, who's the first president of the United States?" And I said, "Well, George Washington." Logical answer. And he goes, "Nope." And I'm like, "What?" Because your older brother is going to tell you something that you don't know. And he looks me right in the eye and he says, "It's John Hanson." So this has been a running joke between Barker and I about who the first president of the United States is. And it does not make John very happy.
Just because the tour guide in DC said that you were technically right, doesn't mean you're right.
Count it.
So the reason that people use John Hanson as the first president of the United States is that he was elected president of the Congress under the Articles of Confederation in 1781, the first government that officially ran the United States while we were in the middle of the American Revolution.
So my logical thought is that guy got called Mr. President. Wow, we had declared our independence. So on a slight technicality, I have said that I am right. And this has gone back and forth until John, the researcher of this group, has found something very, very interesting about that title of president.
So it goes back to the word president comes from Latin and then through French. And essentially it comes from the root of the word to sit before, where a president was called a president because they presided over a meeting, just meaning that they facilitated the meeting, they were in charge of the meeting, they weren't necessarily didn't have any superpowers above the other people in the meeting. And if you want to go by that logic, other people that you could argue, some people would argue that John Hancock could be the first president because he was the president of the Second Continental Congress when the Declaration of Independence was actually signed.
So again, when we're taking a look at this, and we're talking about this, the presidential term changes when George Washington's elected. And one of the biggest questions was, how are you going to address this guy? And there were a wide variety of topics and titles given from His Majesty, but that kind of reflected the king thing. And then you had probably the longest one, which was Richard Henry Lee and John Adams, both proclaimed it was His Excellency the President, protectors of our liberties. And again, could you imagine having to say that every time Donald Trump walks into the room or he comes on TV? You got nothing. However, George Washington, in his modesty, agreed with the House of Representatives for a title that was just very simple. It was Mr. President.
So the crux of the argument becomes, what does it mean to be president? And in the way that we use the term president in the United States, when George Washington adopted that title, it redefined what that word meant. It made him the head of government and state put together in one executive position, where in the past, a president was more like a Speaker of the House, or like the person who's actually like the president of the Senate, which just means the person who says who talks and who, they kind of keep order in the process, as opposed to somebody who actually has executive powers. Plus, under the Articles of Confederation, there technically wasn't an executive branch that would, so there, you can't be an executive if there's no job to be an executive. It's kind of like Jesus. Jesus couldn't be a Christian because, he hadn't died yet, and so he couldn't believe in himself. Kind of random thought, but you can't. He had to be a Jew because he can't believe in himself dying because it hadn't happened yet.
Exactly. This is what this show is about, by the way, because these are the conversations that Barker and I have, and so just be ready to bird walk at any given moment.
Coming from that, though, the United States, because of our position in the world and where we've influenced a lot of other countries, there are 22 countries, I think, around the world that use the term president now in the way that the United States does. A lot of them being in South America, Central America, parts of Africa that have broken away from colonialism and come back, and plus some other areas outside of there that have been liberated by the United States, like Afghanistan and the Philippines. Anywhere that's essentially modeled their government after the U.S. Constitution has adopted that term president in our modern sense, not in the traditional sense, pre-U.S. Constitution.
So, anything else to add on that one, Parker?
I just like to point out that I to prove that I'm right, I always ask Turner, if you were on Jeopardy and the question was, who is the first president of the United States, what would your answer be?
And I let Barker know that Jeopardy always tells you the answer and asks you to ask a question. So therefore, I've already won the game. But my correct answer, and I tell my students this all the time, is if you get asked that question on Jeopardy, the answer is, who is George Washington? So that's it for our first talk. Kind of expect some of these. We're not really sure how often we'll record, but we'll be on the lookout. Until then, I'm Turn.
I'm Bark.
And we're going to turn Bark time. Have a great night, everybody.
Be nice. DBJ, don't be a jerk.
Wash your hands.